The White House's Tori Cooper talks trans history, violence, and why LGBQ don't support the T. Recently, Queer News Tonight sat down with Tori Cooper. She is the Director of Community Engagement for the Transgender Justice Initiative at the HRC and is the first Black trans person on the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS. Here are her thoughts on how the LGBTQ communities can help better support the transgender siblings. Watch this.
Well, next up on Queer News Tonight, we have a very special interview. I'm pleased to welcome Tori Cooper. Tori is a health and equity advocate, community organizer, educator, published author, and leader in the transgender and HIV communities. She leads with more than 30 years of experience at all levels of HIV service, from volunteer roles to her service as executive director and founder of Advocates for a Better Care Atlanta, LLC. She now serves as the Human Rights Campaign's Director of Community Engagement for Transgender Justice Initiative. In this role, her focus includes economic empowerment, capacity building programs, public safety, and expanded public health education campaigns. She is also the first transgendered Black woman to ever sit on the White House's Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS. We are very happy to welcome Tori Cooper to Queer News Tonight. Good evening, Tori.
Good evening, Al. What an honor to be here.
I am very excited. We have been trying to talk to you since the historic announcement of you being added to the White House HIV Commission. First off, congratulations representing our LGBTQ community to that appointment. You must have been very excited on the news.
I am still excited, and thank you very much for that. I understand that it is extremely humbling, and it is also a lot of work to make sure that I am bringing along folks from my community, because I don't just sit there as myself. I sit there serving a whole bunch of other folks, and my job is to be a voice for folks who won't be invited to sit there.
So interesting to me, because we've talked about at Queer News Tonight in so many different stories how representation for our community matters so much to not only represent in our own LGBTQ plus community, whichever letter of the acronym we represent, but to the broader community itself. Well, let's dive right into your expertise. And let's begin by talking about HIV. The disparities among Black trans women in the trans community in general, and the L and the G and the B in our community. How do they contrast in those different groups about what's going on in HIV and prevention and transmission? Tell us a little bit, and give us a 101 in education of what we should know.
So what we should know is that every single problem, every societal issue that every community of folks has, it also exists in Black trans communities. The problem is that we have to go through a lot of systems that weren't created for us. And even considering how on the political side, there's so much anti-trans legislation. I think there are 250 bills currently being promoted that are actually anti-trans. We have to navigate healthcare systems that never considered us. They don't consider our gender. They don't consider our healthcare needs. They don't even consider our race in many, many instances. And so there's a lot of navigation, a lot of hoops, a lot of societal racism and different barriers that we all have to climb through and climb over.
Help us in the very specific issues that we're watching in America. Not only, I want to talk specifically about Black trans women and violence in a couple of moments, but help us help us understand broadly. We also continue to report at Queer News Tonight really very difficult legislations that we're seeing on the state level in many, especially southern states, in approaching anti-LGBT, but very specifically aimed at transgender people. What, from your seat, I know you're a health expert, but there's politics behind health policy, and from the politics of all of this, what do you think is behind what we have been watching in the last 9 months, and why do you think it's happening in America?
There are a number of different things that are happening. One of the things that's happening is that the opposition, we'll refer to all of them as the opposition. The opposition is really picking on a group of folks for whom society holds in low self-esteem already, low esteem already, and that's the trans community, and more specifically the Black trans community. We, under the LGBTQIA plus spectrum, have not prioritized, have not included trans people in anything really from the history, throughout the history of Pride, even though history says that Pride, that Stonewall riots were started by Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, two trans women using today's terminology, and Marsha being Black. And so they're simply picking up a cue from the larger community. Well, we can go after these folks for whom society is left behind, and we can pick on them because nobody's going to protect them. Nobody's going to put their lives on the line. Nobody's going to save them. And they also know that trans people have so little power in society and so little privilege. And so they're picking on the lowest denominator, the low-hanging fruit, if you will. And unfortunately, it's working in some places.
As they do this, and I hear the observation that you've just made, but are they doing this for some gain, or is it? I hear so many different arguments. It's to win elections. It's to win the midterms. It's to create a culture war. It's to marginalize the entire LGBTQ community because they can't get the gay guys. They can't get the gay white boys. What's the motivation behind this to pursue this?
So I think the last couple of things that you mentioned are really part of their goal. They can't get to the white gay guys, and so they're going to go after folks again who have less privilege and power in society. But then I think also the bigger issue is about control, and it is control over every aspect of people's lives. They lost on marriage equality. That's something, they're now saying, we now know the law of the land is that two people can get married who are of consenting age, they want to get married, regardless as to their gender identity, regardless as to their sexuality. So that's a wonderful thing. But what they're saying is, we want to control the lives of people. And if we can go after trans people, if we can dictate who uses a bathroom, then that gives us a little entryway so that we can chip it away at the rights of other folks. And so I think a bigger thing here is all about control and how they want to control every aspect of people's lives.
Tori, I'm curious as I hear you say that. It washes over me so emotionally with what you've watched. You come from a position of privilege in our LGBTQ community and in the trans community, in your representation and your long history of advocacy of our community. With the achievements that we have seen in 2021, the election of the most pro administration that we've ever seen for our community in history. Your appointment to this commission, the recognition that the White House has reached out in so many broad and unique ways for our community, even to the appointment of the first assistant cabinet member that is trans. With all of these mammoth successes, including you in 21, how do you feel about the counterbalance of the disappointment that your community and our broad LGBTQ community, but mostly focused on trans, is under greater attack than we have likely seen since this millennia began? How do you feel about that? How do you personally process those obvious contradictions?
So with greater visibility comes a greater responsibility. There's a greater responsibility for we as trans people as we gain more visibility, as trans is not new to folks anymore. We have a greater responsibility to continue to provide education and making sure that folks understand better who we are, that we reduce some of the stigma and some of the miseducation that exists around our community. But then, using that same thing, with greater visibility comes greater responsibility for everybody that's not trans. Now you can no longer say, well, I don't know if they exist. I don't know anybody. You can't use that anymore. And so the responsibility not lies now on cis folks, on everybody who's not trans, to ensure that we're treated equitably in all spaces, that we pass the Equality Act, for instance, that guarantees protection in all public accommodations, and that policy, anti-trans policy, it doesn't become the law of the land. And also understanding that we all have a place in this. Everybody has a part to play in eradicating stigma and bias and transphobia.
Tori, I'm curious. Every trans conversation I have, I always zero in on one of these. Fascinates. I think is very important for the trans community. You're one of the 5 acronyms, at least one of the 5, and there's more acronyms. The plus adds many more. Does the L and the G and the B of the acronyms in our community, are they picking up, and are they doing enough for the T?
They are not, and they have never done enough. That's the short answer. Now, the good thing is there's always time to do more.
Does it disappoint you in how long it's taking for us to stand up and do more?
Yes, it does. I'm 51 years old. How much longer do we have to wait? And, I mean, that's true. My grandmother used to say she has more days behind her than she has ahead of her. I probably won't live to 102. I'm fat and I'm black, and I live in the South. That's 3 strikes against me.
Strike 1, strike 2, strike 3.
Exactly. But what I do know is that it's better than it was. It's just taking a very, very long time to get there. You think of... yes, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, with that soundbite that you deliver, it's not happening. It's taking too long to get there. Then the third insertion there is speak right out to the L and the G and the B. Help motivate our community to make that change.
And do something. Each of us has a role to play. I often say, everyone should not walk through the middle of the streets carrying signs. There's some people who are better at making signs than they are walking. And there's some people who are better at buying the paint to put on the signs than they are walking. And there's some people who are good at frying chicken to feed the folks who are buying the paint, who are putting on the signs, and then who are walking and marching in the streets. So whatever it is you do, whether you're a person who writes checks, whether you're a person who knocks on doors, or whether you're a person who sits in the boardroom, whatever it is that you do, make sure that you're doing it really through a lens of equity, so that the folks who need the most, who are the most underserved, are now getting the most. They're getting resources that are appropriate for their community to make effective change.
In my church, that's called a call to the altar moment. And I heard your call to the altar very, very clearly. It's excellent. Are you hopeful that we'll accomplish that our community will unite for the trans community? Do you have hope? Or do you live in a place where you're constantly discouraged, but you recognize, okay, but I got to move on anyway?
No, I live and exist off of hope. Again, I'm 51, and so I've seen change happen in my life. Before I came out as trans, I lived as trans, but before I started identifying publicly as trans, it wasn't safe. It didn't feel safe for me to do that, and so I didn't. But I saw how change was happening. I see now that there are folks of all ages and classes and gender identities who are just running out of the closet now, where some folks like me, we crawled out or were pushed out, and so that's hope. That gives me hope. It gives me optimism. It gives me optimism that we're having these conversations right now.
in America. One of the organizations that is fundamentally every day, 24 hours a day, fighting for that hope is the HRC. Tell us a little bit about what our community can do to help support your mission, these issues, and where we want to get in LGBT America. What can we do to help support the HRC's mission?
So I believe that all of us have a role to play. And part of that is really working through an equity of lens and eschewing the spirit of cultural humility. I work for the Human Rights Campaign. I'm the first Black trans woman the second who's ever worked there. Camille N.D. Anderson is the first. And she was only hired a few months before I was in their 42-year history. That's great, but it's not enough. When we think about and when we really are intentional about practicing cultural humility, part of that is the commitment to lifelong learning. It means that I'm an expert, but I'm not the only expert, and I can still continue to learn things. And then also part of that is critical self-evaluation, meaning, sure, I'm doing something, but am I doing enough? Am I doing the right thing now? And being ready for change. The Human Rights Campaign has a legacy of being one of the whitest cis gay organizations in the history of America. But what has happened is we have been very, very intentional to include voices that traditionally have been underserved, even by the Human Rights Campaign itself. And so we have to approach this work really with intentionality to be much more inclusive of voices who are not heard, who hold less power and social capital, and empower folks to advocate for themselves, and then making sure that we use whatever power and privilege that we have in society to influence folks who make decisions.
The words are loud and clear, and of course, we encourage everyone. Learn more about the HRC. Go to their website, hrc.org. Tori, before we end tonight, it would be remiss if I didn't bring up here in South Florida, Royale Poetical Stars. The 40th, at least, probably many, many more than that, Black trans woman murdered here, not 25 minutes from this studio. And we are broadcasting from the gayest place on planet Earth here in South Florida. She is murdered and stabbed 20 times, including in the face. It is clearly a hate crime, especially the stabbing in the face. Tell us your thoughts about what is happening. We're going to be at an all-time record high for violence and murder against Black trans women in America. Tell us about your thoughts about Royale Poetical Stars and what is going on in America in terms of murder and violence to our community.
So here's where I have to center myself, because there's so very little difference between myself and a lot of other folks than the ladies and the other trans folks and the non-binary folks are being killed. Many of them are being killed by people that they know. So when your life is threatened or taken by someone that you know, and we're consistently hearing this message, it makes us think, well, who exactly can we trust if we can't trust people that we're already in relationship with? That's number one. And then you think of the ages of these folks. This lady just graduated from college and was achieving dreams, lifelong dreams, and her life was cut short. It doesn't seem right on so many different levels. And so many of us, we have these conversations, and I applaud the work that Monica Roberts, God bless her soul, was doing, and the work that Dee Dee Waters is doing to really intentionally tell their stories. I'm proud of the work that we're doing at the HRC through our Fatal Violence Report, but also making sure that we're providing a little context and not just blogging that somebody else trans was killed, but making sure we're adding some humanity to their stories so that folks who didn't know them can learn more about them. It's scary, it's frightening, it's sad, but it also speaks to many years of folks disqualifying and discounting trans people. If you say, well, their lives don't matter for so long, then that's going to bleed into society, and that's what it's doing. If people in the LGBTQ community don't believe that trans lives matter, then we certainly can't expect folks outside of it to matter. And they see us as disposable. And that's what's happening. They're disposing of us, for lack of a better word.
Well, unfortunately, we have learned with so many of these names that one of the first and most important things that we do is say her name. And I again will do it, Royale Poetical Stars. More than 40 women trans women of color murdered in America, this one right in our backyard. And we remind our viewers, November 18th, here at the Sunshine Cathedral, the largest queer church in the world, we will hold a national trans town hall. And it will include speakers and spoken word poets and entertainers and singers. And you will have an opportunity to participate in voice just 2 days before the International Day of Remembrance. So we invite you to participate.
May I also add?
Yes.
May I also add, respectively, trans men have been killed as well this year, and also non-binary people.
Absolutely. We encourage you to participate either digitally in whatever platform you would like to see it, or in person. November 18th, our National Trans Town Hall. Tori Cooper, what a pleasure it is to have spoken to you. We are going to be inviting you back for sure. This is a national class, world-class expert in community service, in HIV, serving. By the way, let me just drop that term one more time, the first transgendered Black woman to sit on the White House's Presidential Advisory Council on HIV and AIDS, and also covering transgender and other related services for the HRC. Those are pretty good resume builders over your 30 years, even though you're 51. You're young. You're young. You have a lot more to do.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you.
Tori Cooper, thank you so much for being with us tonight at Queer News Tonight. LGBTQ plus news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Laura are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out television network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now to ensure the growth of the entire LGBTQ plus community.